Hello and welcome to the lesson. Today we are going to study the identification, prioritization, and assigning of accountability for managing existing and potential threats related to non-compliance or related to unethical conduct or ethical misconduct. Now, in the context of governance and compliance, effectively managing threats related to non-compliance requires a structured approach. And this involves identifying these threats. It involves prioritizing the threats based on their potential impact and likelihood, and then clearly assigning accountability for their management. That's what we are going to learn in our today's lesson. These are three things. One is identify. One is to identify threats. Identifying threats. So first of all, let's begin with that. Identifying threats. Then we'll have to move to prioritizing the threats, then assigning accountability for managing the threats. You understand? So it is a process, candidates. It's a continuous cycle within an organization's overall risk management framework, which begins with identification of threats. And this stage involves positively and proactively scanning the internal and external environment to pinpoint potential areas where non-compliance or ethical misconduct could occur. And there are various methods of doing that. There are various methods that can be used to identify threats. You understand? One method is regulatory mapping, what we call comprehensive risk assessments. Way is carrying out comprehensive risk assessment. Comprehensive risk assessment. Okay, as a method. Like regulatory mapping, or scanning. Regulatory mapping or scanning. Creating a detailed inventory of all applicable laws, regulations, industry standards, like the CMA, the CBK regulations, KRA regulations, NEMA regulations, Data Protection Commission's regulations, getting regulations from Labor Ministry, the international conventions that impact the organization in Kenya, and for each, identify specific compliance requirements. So you have a list of all these laws. That's what we are calling regulatory mapping. And identify where these laws are not being complied with. There's also internal policy review. Internal policy review. Conducting an internal policy review. That means reviewing all internal policies, reviewing codes of conduct, reviewing procedures within the organization to identify areas where they might be vague, where they might be outdated, or even just difficult to enforce. For example, procurement procedures or policies. You have sales policies and HR, financial reporting, policies related to data handling. So carry out those areas. Review of internal policy to identify where the company is not complying with its own internal policies. We have business. Another way is through business process analysis. That's also part of comprehensive risk assessment. Carrying out business process analysis. You map key business processes. For example, processes in procurement, processes in sales, processes in financial reporting. You identify all those processes, then identify inherently control weaknesses or points of vulnerability where non-compliance or unethical acts could take place. For example, conflict of interest in procurement, data leakages in IT, bribery in sales. Identify all those areas. The second method that can be used to identify threats is through ethical vulnerability assessment. Ethical vulnerability assessment. For example, you can have culture surveys. Culture surveys. Conducting anonymous surveys to gauge employees' perception of the organization's ethical culture, leadership commitment to ethics, and also confidence in reporting misconduct. Ethical vulnerability assessment can be carried out through whistleblowing, whistleblower mechanisms or hotlines. Whistleblower hotlines and analysis. That means analyzing reports received through whistleblower channels to identify patterns, to identify systematic issues, and also specific areas of concern regarding ethical breaches. Exit interviews. Exit interviews. Gathering insights from departing employees about ethical concerns or compliance gaps they observed while working for the organization. So that's the second method to identify threats. The third method to identify threats is through what we call internal and external audit findings. Internal and external audit findings, reviewing reports from internal audit, from external financial auditors, and also specific compliance or legal audits. And these reports often highlight existing non-compliance or control deficiencies that could lead to ethical misconduct. When an auditor drafts his opinion, he may have also something to say about the internal control system and whatever that he may come across that he finds important for management to address. So internal and external audit findings. The third method to identify threats, the fourth method of identifying threats is through incident and loss event data. Incident and event data. This means analyzing past incidents of non-compliance, of fraud, of data breaches, or ethical violations in order to understand the root cause and also identify recurring vulnerabilities. 5. Industry benchmarks and peer learning. This means researching and learning from compliance failures or ethical scandals that have affected similar organizations or industries, both locally and internationally. One can get what threats did they face that could also impact your organization. Peer learning. You learn from your peers. Identify similar organizations in other countries in the same industry. Find out what threats that they have to grapple with, then learn from them, and that can also help you identify threats within your own organization. Expert consultation. Number 6, expert consultation. This means engaging a legal counsel or compliance consultants or industry experts to gain insights into emerging risks or complex regulatory interpretations specific to the organization and the business environment. Next is board. Information can also be gathered from the board. Let me say board stroke leadership input. Board stroke leadership input. This is information from the senior management and the board, given their strategic oversight, which often can have unique perspectives or high-level governance and potential threats of ethical compliance. You understand? Yes. So these are ways to identify threats. Then we can move to prioritization of threats. After identifying the threats using these methods, there is the prioritization. Prioritization of threats. Prioritization of threats. How do you prioritize threats? Now, not all threats are equal, and therefore prioritization ensures that resources are allocated effectively to address the most significant risks first. And this involves assessing the likelihood of the threat occurring and the impact of it, if it does. So what is the criteria? What is the criteria for prioritizing these threats? One is on the basis of likelihood or probability. Likelihood or probability. You determine the probability or likelihood of such threats. There are threats that are very likely to occur based on past experience, based on the weak controls or high exposure. Like continuously handling sensitive data without encryption, without proper encryption. There is very likelihood of the threat occurring where you handle data without encryption. But you also have those threats that could occur, but not frequently, or those that are dependent on specific circumstances. Then you have likelihood that is low. That means unlikely to occur due to strong controls, due to low exposure, or just rare circumstances. So you prioritize based on likelihood or probability. There are those that are highly most likely to occur. We have those threats that are occurrence is medium. Then there is those threats that may not occur. So you can categorize, you can prioritize based on likelihood or probability. Very likely could occur but not frequently, or unlikely to occur. Prioritization can also be based on impact or consequence. consequence or impact. We may have legal impact. This is the severity of potential fines, penalties, imprisonment, license revocation, litigation, and so on. For example, you may have non-compliance with tax laws, which often carries immediate and severe financial penalties. You may also have example like breaching data protection laws, which can lead to significant fines and reputational damage. So you prioritize the likelihood of these threats occurring by consequence. We have legal impact, there is financial impact, like direct costs, fines, legal fees, remediation, and indirect costs like loss of revenue, increased operational costs, and so on. We also discussed earlier on reputational impact, degrees of damage to brand, public trust, customer loyalty, and so on. For example, you may have a scandal involving corruption in a public procurement process, which can severely damage a company's standing and disqualify it from future government contracts. So when impact, you look at all those areas: operational impact, strategic impact, and so on. So that's another way to prioritize threats. You prioritize threats based on their impact. It could be legal impact, financial impact, reputational impact, operational impact, strategic impact, and so on. Then you check the speed. That is the speed of onset, how quickly the impact could materialize. That's another way to prioritize the threats. There is also another thing to consider, which is interdependence. Interdependence. What do I mean by interdependence? This is how one threat might trigger or exacerbate other threats. You understand? So there are various ways that can be used to prioritize threats. Now let's move to the third aspect of this lesson, which is assigning accountability for managing existing and potential threats. Assigning accountability. Assigning accountability. Assigning accountability for managing threats. Now, once identified and prioritized, clear ownership is essential for effective management. And accountability means that specific individuals or teams are responsible for ensuring that controls are in place and that the risk is actively managed and controlled. And there are some principles for assigning accountability. Let's discuss the principles. Principles or guidelines for assigning accountability. One is what we call risk ownership at the operational level. Risk ownership at the operational level. Risk ownership at the operational level. Here, the individual or department closest to the risk, who has the most control over the activities that give rise to the risk, should be the primary owner. And this ensures practical and efficient risk mitigation. For example, you may have, for compliance with data protection laws, we may have the IT department that might be accountable for technical security controls, while the HR department is accountable for employee data privacy and the marketing department for customer data consent. You understand? Yes. So that is one principle. Then the second principle is in relation to management. Management oversight. Oversight by management. This is where senior management is accountable for overall or for overseeing the overall risk management process, ensuring that adequate resources are allocated and that risk owners are performing their duties. For example, we may have the chief finance officer who is accountable for the integrity of financial reporting and the overall financial compliance. Then you have board and committee oversight. 3, board and committee. Board and committee oversight. Board and committee oversight. Here, the board of directors, particularly the audit committee and the risk committee, has the ultimate accountability for overall governance, for overseeing the organization's risk management framework, including major compliance and ethical risks. So they do not manage the risk directly, but they ensure that management is doing so effectively. For example, you may have the audit committee that will review reports on significant financial compliance risks and internal control effectiveness. You may also have the risk committee that oversees the enterprise-wide risk profile, including strategic governance risks. Another principle is ethics and compliance officer. Ethics and compliance officer. Now, the ethics and compliance officer plays a crucial role in facilitating accountability framework because they ensure, for example, they help identify risk owners, number one. Number two, they provide guidance and support to risk owners. Number three, they monitor the effectiveness of risk management activities. Number four, they report on the status of risk and mitigation efforts to senior management and also to the board. Number five, they hold training and awareness sessions to embed accountability across the organization. So, in assigning accountability, one of the principles is to have ethics and compliance officers. 5, clear mandates and resources. Clear mandates and resources. Accountability must be accompanied by the necessary authority resources like budgets, personnel, technology, and also clear mandates to manage the assigned threats effectively. So there has to be mandate or authority that is given out for employees to help in management of risks. Accountability must be accompanied by the necessary authority. It must be accompanied by the necessary resources like budget, like personnel. These people ought to be given the right technology and clear mandates to manage the assigned threats effectively. Then lastly, we have regular reporting and review. Regular reporting and review. The company should establish clear reporting lines and frequencies for risk owners to report on their assigned threats, the status of controls, and any new developments. Because that will then ensure that accountability is ongoing and transparent. You understand? So these are some of the principles of assigning accountability. So in this lesson's candidate, in this lesson we have studied the methods that can be used to identify threats. One such method is comprehensive risk assessment. For example, regulatory mapping, internal policy reviews, business process analysis. Number two, ethical vulnerability assessments like culture surveys, whistleblower hotlines, exit interviews. These are methods to identify threats. Number 3, we have internal and external audit findings. Number 4, incident and loss event data. Number 5, there is industry benchmarks and peer learning from similar organizations. Then 5, you have expert consultations, board leadership input. The board can have input in the process. Then we have studied the criteria for prioritizing threats. Once threats have been identified, threats are not equal. There are those that are likely to occur. There are those that are least likely to occur. So there has to be a criteria for prioritizing the threat so that resources are allocated where necessary. So we've studied likelihood. One criterion is likelihood or probability. Number 2 is carrying out what we call impact and consequences. Analyzing the impact and consequences, we have speed and interdependence. Then lastly, we have identified 5 principles that can be used or followed when assigning accountability. All right. 1 is risk ownership at the operational level. There has to be people owning the process at the operational level. Number 2, management oversight. Number 3, board and committee oversight. Another principle is ethics and compliance officer, clear mandates and resources, then regular reporting and review. So by diligently following these steps, candidates, and principles, organizations can build a robust system for identifying, for prioritizing, and also assigning the accountability for managing existing and potential threats, thereby safeguarding the operations, reputation, and also long-term sustainability. If you have any question, please, you are free to ask your questions, and all your questions will be answered. Below this video, there is a comment section where we allow you to post your questions, and we will answer all questions. Bye-bye.